In this episode of 8760, we host Kevin Klipstein, President and CEO of US Squash. Looking forward to hearing his thoughts on the induction of squash into the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles, how he made the transition from marketing events at Sun Microsystems to a sports league and navigating multiple different entities internationally to grow and preserve the vision of a 150-year-old sport, and also dig into his leadership style and how he maintains consistency, stability, and that ever-present drive toward the vision of the future of squash while handling day-to-day responsibilities and coaching and mentoring his team. I mean, Kevin, thanks for joining us. Kind of exciting news, right? That to come out of the world of squash is the inclusion in the upcoming 2028 Olympics. Has that been something you've been working on diligently, or how did that evolve?
Well, it's been an ambition of the sport for 30 years or more. And so U.S. Squash has been part of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee since the early to mid 90s. And we've kind of worked our way up the ladder, and we're part of the Pan American Games. And then the IOC approves whether or not to let sports in. And so we've had many failed attempts over the last 20 years and always felt very close. And we meet all the criteria as a sport. We're global, we're a clean sport, 20 million participants worldwide. It's on television, et cetera. However, never got the nod. And we've been involved in the process, but because the games were in the US, LA, and the LA 28 organizing committee was a lot more involved in the process to make recommendations to the IOC, we got a lot more involved. And I think that was really helpful to the bid, just because LA 28 ran a really professional process, whereas I think in the past, sometimes it was a little bit more political. So that was beneficial to us. And just the fact that the sport's doing quite well in the US and sort of has a really positive trajectory, I think made it easier for LA to recommend and the IOC to accept in that, this sport is on the ascendancy. So we were quite involved, and honestly, it's been almost 18 months, and it's, as you would imagine, set off sort of this cascading set of circumstances for us to take advantage of the opportunities it's created.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about sort of the trajectory of the sport and what you've seen. To be honest, prepping for the conversation, I had to dust off did the Google search of squash versus racquetball and tried to draw the line. But what have you seen sort of from the inside about the acceptance, sort of understanding, adoption of the sport, and was there a specific kind of tipping point, or has it been gradual?
Well, it's hard to answer that without geeking out on squash, which...
Geek out, let's do it.
So now we've lost 99.5% of the audience here, but
the ones who are engaged are really engaged.
What's that?
I said the ones who are engaged are really engaged.
Yes. Well, that defines squash in a lot of ways, right? You have people who are just super into it, like a lot of niche sports. However, in the US and Canada and Mexico, we were playing a different version of the game, a narrower court and a harder ball than the rest of the world. So it's sort of baseball to cricket analogy. And in part because of just general influx of international players, and also the desire to sort of bring the sport together, the international version really started to penetrate the US market in the 80s, and then by the early 90s, it started to become essentially the default game. And there was a struggle in the 1990s, really at US Squash. I was not there. Hey, which game are we actually going to get behind? And the association actually wanted to stay with the America's Focus game, but kind of lost out to the marketplace in a lot of ways. And so by around 2000, that transition had happened. And since then, it's been 25 years, Lots of facilities have been converted because it's a wider court and it's a different enough game where we have not been that competitive internationally up until, the last decade or so, and now we are. But as a result, sort of it's a much more international, diverse sport because it's attracted people from all over the world who actually live in this country now to support it and help drive the growth. And then the college game has exploded, and part of that is international recruiting. So the face of the game, if you will, sort of metaphorically, and it actually has changed really dramatically over the last 20 years. And that's we're a growth market now, and going from niche to with the Olympic exposure, we're not a well-known sport in the U.S. We're sort of on the periphery of mainstream, and I think we'll become at least better known in the U.S., and that will drive growth too.
How have you kind of like when you talk about adoption and probably a need for ambassadorship, like, since you've come in, how have you approached trying to like spread the gospel about the sport and get more people engaged? Like, what are those levers that you pulled?
That's an interesting question, in part because we've been more focused on our infrastructure and sort of just kind of getting the work done and creating a strong foundation over the last decade or two, and less so on sort of that high level air cover, I call it, and sort of the marketing of the sport and building awareness and interest. Because in reality, part of the perception of squash is it's not particularly accessible, and that's partly true. It's a lot more accessible now than it was even 20 years ago, but it's still small. I mean, you have to seek it out. You have to kind of know about it right now. Again, that's changing, and even in New York City, you're seeing commercial clubs open every year, and real estate, it's expensive here. Lots of things you could do with space here, but people are building squash facilities and they're being successful. So that's a good sort of indicator of the health and attractiveness of the sport. But for us, we wanted to make sure that college squash was a great product and experience, both at the varsity and club level. We wanted to make sure that high school squash and middle school squash was available in public schools and private schools, and that meant something sort of locally, regionally, and nationally. Because it's a small community, we sort of made the decision to say, look, we're small, we need to be united. So we actually invested, starting about a decade ago, into a software as a service product that did everything from court reservations to tournaments to leagues to membership to registration to rankings and seedings, everything. So in having a reservation system that we could provide to all the facilities basically for free, we were able to get the whole squash community in a single database and engage them. So we focused on bringing the community together to say, look, let's be efficient, let's be focused, let's be together in what we're doing. And now that we've achieved that, we sort of have, this continuum now with the Olympics and that high level air cover, and other companies and organizations like NBC and sponsors spending money to promote their affiliation with the sport. Now I think we're going to see sort of that growth, and we're able to support it with our software and with just our stronger infrastructure. And obviously we built a national center too, which is helpful as well.
And it seems like you've got like a perfect ramp up period to the Olympics to help kind of democratize awareness and accessibility of squash, and then use the Olympics as a tipping point to potentially start looking at more on the boots on the ground ambassadorship and things like that. That's pretty cool.
100%. And we don't live in a bubble. We see what's going on out there in terms of pickleball.
It's everywhere.
And, you may have, what's that?
I said it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Has that been helpful? I mean, did that get people to sort of dust off their rackets? Seeing that this groundswell in I won't say a similar sport, but a racket sport, right? That is more accessible.
I mean, it's all positive. So my colleagues are the 50 CEOs of the other national sports governing bodies, and we're all rooting for each other. We just want sort of an active, healthy country, from kids all the way through adults. So while we're generally known, and now U.S. Squash is known as part of Team USA and sort of the tip of the pyramid, really most of our work is focused on the grassroots. And so that pickleball has come along and sort of, captured, everyone's attention is great. And the fact that it's a racket or paddle sport is helpful. There's also another sport called padel, which you may have heard of, which is like platform tennis, but it has sort of glass back walls instead of the chicken wire. And so it's like a hybrid between squash and tennis. And it's a little bit easier than tennis because you don't have to, it's a smaller court. You don't have to go chasing the balls. And so we're seeing tennis players go to that. We're seeing people who have never played a racket or a paddle sport getting into pickleball. And so we're starting to see pickleball, padel, and squash facilities open up because there's sort of this continuum of, pickleball is the easiest, padel is in the middle, and squash is probably from a skill set perspective, it's, even a little bit more challenging. So we're seeing a nice ecosystem develop. And so we see pickleball as a gateway to, just being active and part of the racket and paddle community. And so I think it's early days on that front. And what we've done is invested in innovations in court technology to make low cost modular courts easy to set up indoors and outdoors. Because that, if you don't have the infrastructure, you can promote squash all you want, but if there's no place to play, it's not doing any good.
Yeah, I was going to sort of ask about that. We were talking about accessibility. It seems like there's a real fine line between sort of exclusivity, accessibility, and breaking down those barriers. I think there are other sports that have accessibility challenges based off of, their either investment or just the type of space like golf, right, that you need to play. And there have been some evolutions that have made that easier in simulators and things like that. But, getting the transition from, all the images of my mind of squash or, Wall Street execs in a movie, right? Like, yeah, it's like, right. So it's like, do you see the need or are you kind of planning potentially it's a big step, but like the Tiger moment, right? Like when Tiger was seen as a golfer, it opened up everyone's eyes to this isn't just a country club sport, right? So the Caitlin Clark, or, is there part of that that's sort of in the works as this 2028, kind of debut is in the viewport?
Well, first of all, we're in it for the long term, so we've been around for 125 years as an organization, and the sport is more than 150 years old. So, we're looking 10, 20, 30 years out. The other part of that is we are working hard not to be one and done in terms of being in the Olympics. So Brisbane is in 2032 in Australia, historically a really strong squash country. We're not sure, it hasn't been declared where 2036 will be, but we anticipate maybe it's somewhere in Asia, maybe in another strong squash market. So ideally, there's a longer pathway because to develop players, takes a long time. And while there's a really diverse base already, it's small. And so as the sport grows, you just get a bigger base and it's more diverse. We're hopeful that because squash is new, because it's not well known but has great stories, and because squash is going to be at Universal Studios a lot in LA, which is one of the most sort of Hollywood locations of LA, that the sport will get attention. And so if we have a bit of a breakout moment from a medal perspective, American, that I think is part of the story. There are also, everyone cites the example of Formula One and its breakout in the U.S. because of Netflix specials and things like that. So we expect those types of projects to sort of gain some traction, whether it's pre-Olympics or post. And then from an audience perspective, or who's in the pipeline, growth sort of takes care of that, and that's why governing bodies are focused on growth and increasing the base. The bigger the base, the better chance you have of having great players at the top or athletes. And so we like to steal from hockey and from baseball and from lacrosse. Yeah, those are all good cross-training sports, and kids are deciding at age 11, 12, 13, where am I going to put my time? And so we're finally sort of in that mix in terms of top athletes. And then the final thing is there are, just like First Tee is for golf, there are more than 20 squash and education programs that explicitly have programs in underserved communities that are sort of going to that extreme to say, look, squash has been, let's call it, middle, upper class available. Like, let's go to the extreme. And then US Squash is also working to fill in that middle. So yeah, there could be a breakout star from there. There's some who are part of the Philadelphia, or were part of the Philadelphia Squash and Education Program, who are recruited into college, who are potential, probably more for 2032 than for 2028. But that's all in the works, and that's why I think people are looking at the sport generally and saying, this is this is an opportunity and in early stages of development, even though the sport's been around for a long time.
So you're not about to kickstart the Olivia Weaver PR tour like Livy Dunn or Simone Biles or something like that to try and get some visibility.
We're gonna do that too. Yeah. I mean, we would be foolish not to, obviously, and we're pushing hard for. She's doing her own efforts. We're amplifying that. We're supporting her financially and otherwise. And obviously, her results have been amazing. So we'll see. It's a lot easier to promote a world number one, clearly. So we're hoping for the best.
For some of that community outreach that you were talking about, is that, kind of retrofitting, handball courts and really trying to infuse the sport into these communities, it seems like, those are, I mean, I haven't been in, in Rucker Park for a while, right? Or haven't been, through the courts in New York in a long time, but it feels like those weren't being utilized for handball when I was there. So, are there opportunities to kind of put it into the cultural landscape of the U.S.?
Absolutely. 2 weeks ago, we opened our first outdoor court in a park, Union Park in Chicago. And the project was a collaboration between us and the PSA, which is the Professional Squash Association Tours Foundation. And they've had world championships in Chicago every other year for the last, I think, 6 years. And so the project was called Project Beacon, which is, hey, this outdoor court looks amazing. It's beautiful. It's going to have local artwork on the sides, and it's in a public park that's embraced and owned by the park, and they lend out rackets and balls, etc. And so it's truly a beacon for the sport to say, hey, what's that? Oh, that's squash. I want to try that. And so for us, it was important to sort of have that be as turnkey as possible to prove the model. Outdoor squash actually is a thing. It's just like pickleball and padel and tennis, and it's affordable. And so we will start seeding those in parks around the country, and definitely New York with its density and is an obvious place for us to invest. So again, that it was important for us to sort of nail the infrastructure and make it as turnkey, and now we have that. And then the follow-up is, well, how many can you put out there? And then are there unexplored places where you can put up the same version of that court, but it's lighter weight and lower cost and easier to set up and take down. So it's more modular. Again, it's you don't want to introduce a sport to a kid or a community, but then not have them have the opportunity to kind of continue with it. So I think those are great opportunities for us that we're going to lean into.
Are those things that you're developing internally, or do you have have partners already come to the table to try and help engineer those?
Sure. That's a bit of a tricky question to answer because as the governing body, we're agnostic and we support all manufacturers and appreciate their investment and commitment to the sport. At the same time, we felt like we had to stimulate innovation in the space. And the Project Beacon effort was really instrumental in ultimately identifying a designer who could then get it manufactured. And so we worked with him, and then we said, we love this outdoor concept. We're going to support it. We're going to support this pilot financially. However, we also want you to, what we really need is an indoor version of this that's super low cost and easy to set up. And so we worked with him on that prototype, and we set that up at a convention called RacquetX in March, I guess it was, in Miami. And that's pickleball, padel, tennis, table tennis, squash. And so we had this prototype right in the middle of the convention center in Miami Beach of this really easy to set up, low cost court. And so we think others will innovate along those lines too, and we think the marketplace will be big enough for competition. But we did sort of, put our finger on the scale a little bit to say, look, we need this to happen. We need to show it's possible, and then let the.
You had mentioned, how you kind of look at the CEOs or presidents of the other leagues as colleagues, right? And the idea of a healthier, more sport participant, population in across the U.S. and the world. What's it like? I mean, as far as even within squash, with the PSA, the NSL, the National Squash League, the U.S. Squash as the sort of governing body. How do you navigate, those relationships, and how do you continue to put the sport above, notoriety or awareness of the organization itself?
It's been relatively easy. If you look at it globally first, we've been supporters of the PSA tour for the last 2 decades as we converted to the international version. And about 1/3 of the prize money for the tour globally is paid out at events in the U.S. So as a result, we've been involved in that. The people who organize and run those tournaments are the same ones who run a lot of our other programs and events. And so there's sort of a natural symbiosis. So that's sort of one aspect of it. In coming together around the Olympics and the effort, particularly in LA, we sort of had a moment where it's like, look, we all need to trust each other and work together and play to our strengths in order for us to be successful. And so we sort of took that step forward. And that was about 2 years into, it took about 2 years to sort of that whole inclusion bid process. And then based on that foundation, a lot of the same people are involved. It's a relatively small group. And so we've sort of maintained that trust to now implement against the LA Games and make that successful. And so I think that's made all these other discussions easier. So for example, the PSA Tour, they do essentially the broadcast product. They produce it in-house. And then the question is, well, how are we working together to get the best distribution deals in the US now? That hasn't been a focus of ours before, but we're now at that moment. Let's work together to figure that out. And in the US, you have NSL, this upstart league that you mentioned. Yeah, as soon as they started, we said, hey, how can we help? We'll promote you. This is good for the game. This is bringing awareness to it. This is providing more income opportunity for squash professionals. So it's relatively egoless. I think it gets a little bit challenging sometimes from a fundraising perspective because there isn't sort of a corporate economy and economic ecosystem for squash like there is tennis, because it's so much smaller. So, a lot of it's based on fundraising and donations. So that can get a little bit competitive. But in general, I think it's a highly collaborative community, and people are generally willing to sort of play to the strengths of the organizations. And it's in part our job to sort of bring people together and work together. We're sort of at the center of the ecosystem. There isn't necessarily a hierarchy there.
Did you have to, like when you stepped into the role, was this sense of collaboration with the various stakeholders, was this something that existed at that point, or was this something like as part of the infrastructure build, you needed to foster that ability to partner with whatever stakeholders were in play at that time?
Definitely the latter.
So how did that go? Like what was your approach? It feels like you have like slow is smooth and smooth is fast approach, a sense of like longevity in terms of like where your focus is. Was there a sense of urgency at the beginning to try and build out like this coalition in order to collectively push the sport forward?
There was a sense of urgency on my part. I came from the corporate world and just sort of moved quickly and with clarity of purpose. And when I came into US Squash, the staff was only 4 people. We were less than $1 million organization. We didn't necessarily have control over our own events. And so it was a pretty fragmented group. And so that was about 20 years ago. And one example of sort of people, because it was a small pie, sort of defending their turf, is in college squash. It used to be managed by and run by the coaches. And there were 2 different organizations, Women's Coach Association and the Men's Coach Association. And they didn't even work together. And so I went to each of those boards, which again, they're essentially volunteer boards because they're just coaches. So they're self-managing and self-adjudicating, which is problematic. And I said, hey, I'd like to come to your meeting to just introduce myself, tell you what we're doing, and sort of hear how we can work together. And it took me a couple of years just to get invited to the meeting, to let them come to the meeting. So it's been a long pathway to sort of building, sort of almost brick by brick, sort of, hey, the spirit of we're stronger together, let's collaborate. And now, ultimately, we provided a lot of support for college squash because their success ultimately is our success. If kids have an opportunity to go play in college, that's great for the sport. We want that to be a great experience. And so it just took a long time to convince people that, we're not the Death Star, we're not the evil empire. We're not trying to take over and control things. We're just trying to strengthen, ourselves as a sport and be efficient about it. Now they came together, women and men. We formed a majority independent board of college squash. The coaches are represented, but they're in the minority. And that makes it easier to sort of oversee them and hold the coaches to a higher standard and make them accountable and enforce the rules and all those things. And as a result, the College Association is this separate, thriving organization in our ecosystem. So, but that's taken years. And I think in the nonprofit world, mission-driven world, it does take sort of that persistence over time, because you don't have necessarily the financial leverage to make things happen quickly, and so it needs to be based on experience and trust, and it's taken a lot longer to sort of build the foundation of where we are now than I expected it. I would have thought 5 years, 6 years, we can kind of get the sport to where we are now.
Were you trying to? Oops, sorry. I was just wondering, were you trying to run parallel paths in the U.S. while also trying to, open doors internationally for expansion, or was it, let's get our stuff sorted here and then we're going to focus on international expansion?
Yeah, I mean, since we are U.S. Squash, we are members of the World Squash Federation, and because we're such a big country and relatively affluent and a larger squash market, we have a seat at the table internationally. But yeah, we're not. That's not part of our mission to sort of grow the sport globally. We're now looked to as sort of the high potential market for the sport to grow here, and then in some ways sort of re-export it out to the rest of the world, sort of as the sport grows here, sort of to re-stimulate growth around the rest of the world.
Going back to you had mentioned it quickly, and I would never believe it was 20 years ago, but the transition you made from Sun Microsystems to the world of squash, what was going on? What kind of led you to that jump, and how did you even approach it?
Well, it was against the advice of people I respect and admire. I reached out to some former bosses of mine and said, "Hey, this opportunity's come up. What do you think?" And they said, "No, don't do it. What are you going to do next? What are you going to do after that?" And so, which I thought I disregarded. I was younger then. I was only 35. So, but I had always loved events coming out of college, and I worked for interned for a major festival and concert producer in Seattle, and then got a job at an event production company, an event company, basically a game company, and ran their events. And I got exposed to the sports and sponsorship world there. Sort of, we used that model to sort of amplify our events. We got other corporate sponsors, and I said, I really like that. And so then I went, I got a job at a major sports marketing agency and did consulting for corporate clients there. And that really kind of opened up things for me in my world. I said, wow, this is a big space, which is a lot of fun. And then I did that in-house at Sun Microsystems. So we had a Formula One deal. We were sales and marketing partners in launching MLB.com back in the early 2000s, which was a big deal at the time to consolidate all those websites. So some fun projects, but 10 years into sort of the corporate world, I want to explore the nonprofit space, and wanted to join some nonprofit boards, and sort of wanted to be a little bit more, I think, purposeful. And so when this job came up, I thought, well, I'm definitely qualified. I've got all this sports marketing experience. I've got operations experience from Six Sigma, and I'm a squash player. I love the sport. I played in college. And while it's a nonprofit, it can be run like a business. And so I just felt like it was a perfect fit at the time. So I tossed my hat in the ring and sort of, went from there.
Was it daunting going from kind of like being part of these larger organizations to all of a sudden leading one?
I definitely viewed it as a leadership opportunity. It was brutal. It was a very, very hard couple years initially. And on the one hand, don't feel like I've worked a day in the last 20 years. It's really been a passion of mine to grow and develop the sport, not only because I love squash. Ironically, I play a lot less because it's just, the world's a busy place and it's a busy job and family and all that. But it's been fun and exciting, and every few years it's been a different role. So it's provided me growth opportunities, which I've really valued. At the same time, it's just really hard work to run and lead a nonprofit, resource constrained, usually in a small market. It's a small sport. And running a nonprofit is just a very different kind of business. Yeah. And especially a sports governing body, where in the end you're the legislative, you're the executive, you're the judicial. And so there are going to be a lot of people who kind of don't have a great experience with you, even though on the whole you're doing good things. And one way or another, you're going to rub somebody the wrong way. And so you're an easy target. And so, if you're in baseball, you can love or hate the GM of your favorite team, but you sort of MLB, generally you're not going to have ill will towards. For us, we're sort of one of the few targets out there, and there's a high expectation for what we do, and so it's been hard. I've really enjoyed it, many aspects of it, and I'm super excited about the future because of the foundation that we built, and the Olympics has been transformational, really, even just in the last few months as things really sort of swing into motion. It's been really interesting to see.
Yeah, unless you're the NFL and Roger Goodell and get universally booed wherever you go, no matter what, right?
You know what, though? He's getting his pound of flesh every year, so I think he's okay.
He's not worried about it when he checks his bank account, that's for sure. So, we always have, the Shaping Connecticut's Future events sort of on the top of at least Sam and I's mind, and this upcoming event on entrepreneurship and leadership. When you were sort of telling the story about how, those that were mentors or advisors or close to you, sort of said, "What are you doing?" And you sort of forged forward despite that. I guess a question I'd have would be, what have you learned or what did you experience from the moment you decided to take on this challenge, where if someone were to ask you something similar, the answer wouldn't be, what are you thinking? But you would, be able to kind of give some insight into how to make that transition or really, be successful in that next evolution.
Some of the lessons I've learned or the things I believe or just have gotten more clarity in, I feel like I've sort of known unconsciously or internally, but it's sort of been brought to the fore, is having a clear mission, having a clear vision, and being laser focused on it is sort of everything. And just sort of, I can only base it off my own experiences here. And, I feel like I read and sort of observe what's going on in the world. And there's obviously a lot going on in every space, every industry and government, et cetera. So it's a complicated world. And so even more so, being focused on the mission and understanding what that is and prioritizing every effort that you make, making sure it's fully aligned with that and being clear on the strategy, being clear on the goals, and how you're allocating those resources. And I think that's true whether it be a nonprofit or for-profit. The mission ultimately for profits obviously is to make money. However, you take it down one level and you have a certain strategy and you have certain goals that are aligned to that overall mission, and just being really rigorous about prioritizing, even if you have more resources. I think the everyday prioritization. And so for me, having that greater sense of purpose for us as an organization is lifelong positive engagement with the sport. And, we really believe that involvement in sport brings community. It's a healthy part of healthy body, healthy mind, emotionally, mentally. And so we really believe that what we're doing is, as we grow the sport and engage people sort of for a lifelong sport, we're improving their lives and we're improving communities. And so that's a big part of what motivates us. So understanding what that motivation is, again, sort of that North Star, and just being really rigorous about aligning everything to that. And frankly, then it's just hard work. It's just grinding it out.
The will to see the vision through, right?
The conviction you have to have, especially if there's like naysayers from the beginning,
Is there anything that you, looking back, say, oh, if I had done this earlier or different, those first couple of years would have been less of a slog and would have been a little bit easier to get through?
I'm not sure. Probably. It's also a little bit hard because it's been 20 years. And if
Yeah.
you think of how much has changed in 20 years, we didn't have cell phones really. There wasn't social media. That whole dynamic, right? I mean, that whole dynamic has just really changed everything. And in our little space of the world, in terms of sort of getting people outside off their phones and outside into the world and engaging with each other, I think we're sort of countercultural, but in part sort of a bit of the future, in the sense that people are really going to be actively pursuing those outlets, and that may be in part why pickleball has been so successful and popular lately, because it's easy. You just need a paddle and a ball, and tennis courts are everywhere, and you go out there, and they brought people together and interacting and in person. Also, as a leader, there are lots of different ways to be a leader. That there are communities value leaders in different ways and different types of leaders, and we all have different skill sets. So for me, I'm more of a process, incremental, foundation person, as opposed to sort of that out front, charismatic leader who's going to be, fundraising tens of millions of dollars and kind of rallying people. And so I think there are different ways to get there. And so I've sort of, played to my strengths, and I think in the end it's paid off well for the sport and the organization. But I'm sure there are different ways to have approached it. But I think in the end it's worked for me, and I think it's worked pretty well for the sport.
I mean, absolutely, right? When you look to the future, you mentioned you're 10, 20, 30 years out, right? As far as you want to think about the longevity in the next 150 years, as the world changes so quickly, and, trends and fads, and, pickleball may not be around in 18 months, right? But the intent obviously is for squash to continue to grow. So, how are you approaching that, sort of seeing the shifts and seeing some of the fickleness, of folks, and it only getting worse, not necessarily getting better?
Well, we're not going to be controlling sort of the macro environment. So just kind of doing what we do and what we know, and making that an option for people, and an easy option. I hesitate to use this word, but squash can be addictive. If you golf, golf can feel kind of addictive. It also takes a ton of time, and it's expensive and takes a lot of space, et cetera. Squash, not so much. It's healthier for you. It's quick, and if it's available, it's hard to give up. You love it, and you can play it from age 4 to 94.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, 10-year-olds can play with 70-year-olds. You modify the rules a little bit, and that's a really nice intergenerational, cross-cultural engagement. So I think there are a lot of positives that people are craving, even if it's not sort of front of mind, or if it's away from their phone. And so for us, it's two things really. Or I would say three. One is the low-cost modular courts. Clearly, getting that out there in the marketplace in different ways. Two is middle and high schools. Squash is not yet recognized by any state board of education in the country. Whereas if you think about tennis, well, every state board of education puts funds against promoting high school tennis in public schools, right? So the contrast there is stark. And so penetrating public middle and high schools has been an early focus of ours, and will be even more so. And for us to facilitate community squash centers where multiple schools can use that facility is going to be sort of the future development of the sport, I think. The other is more program directors. So there are 15,000 trained professional tennis coaches out there. It's a huge sport. Part of the reason sports like pickleball have also continued, and sports like padel will do well, is those tennis pros are looking at that and saying, well, people are playing that, I can coach that too and make money. So we want to make sure that those professionals understand squash, have the qualifications, and sort of embrace squash as part of that ecosystem. So sort of drafting off that is important. So you not only do you need the infrastructure and the courts to play and sort of stimulating that at public, middle, and high schools, you also need people who can sort of support that ecosystem on a daily basis. So that's what we're going to do. And so we see that as a nice mix across, there end up being community centers, also available to kids, but as a family as well, and supported by qualified professionals and coaches. And for any of us who have played sports, people have asked me in the past, who's your favorite teacher? I said, well, I can't really think of many teachers, but I can name a few coaches who really influenced my life.
Got a question for the future, Kevin. What is your prediction at the Olympics for gold, silver, bronze?
I think it will be, you mean, countries or players?
Yeah, countries.
I think it'll be, I think the U.S. will medal, definitely on the women's side. And I think Egypt will definitely medal, probably on men's and women's. And then it's a bit of a toss-up whether it be England or France or question mark. So I think that's probably the landscape there.
What's the most surprising sort of, country or, the pocket of the world that is addicted, like squash addicted? What have you been most surprised by, where there's been the highest rate of adoption?
Well, China, the sport is exploding. There are hundreds of courts being built almost on a quarterly basis, and they're investing in coaches and really developing sport, which we hope is a harbinger of future support for continuing to be included in the games, which we think makes a lot of sense. So that's been the hope, was if we get in the games, China will invest, and that's helpful to have 1 billion plus people. What may surprise you and the audience is how strong it is in Malaysia. So Malaysia is a pretty big country. They have very strong national programs, pretty wide adoption and availability. And so in Egypt and Malaysia, for example, you have top players who are truly national celebrities, because they don't have a lot of top athletes globally, for one, but also they're just that good. So Nicole David was 8-time world champion, number one in the world for years, truly a national celebrity there. And so, and in Egypt, sort of similar dynamic as well. So that may surprise folks.
I was wondering if there was
Well, that's sleeper.
Some random like Costa Rica. They can't stay away.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, Colombia has a really strong history of top players who have cracked into the top 10. So they could have somebody coming along. Japan potentially. I think the landscape is changing really quickly as a result of being in the Olympics. I'll say that.
That'll be pretty cool to see it.
With your ties to Connecticut and the new, relatively last 12 or 18 months, NSL team in South Norwalk, do you see any unique opportunities for the sport to grow here in Connecticut, or for businesses to embrace it in a unique way?
Well, businesses to embrace it. In terms of commercially, I think entrepreneurs are going to step into that space. The first commercial club with this new indoor modular courts opening in Miami. They'll have 6 courts. It's just a warehouse. They said, hey, we're going to get a short-term lease. We're going to pop up these 6 courts. We're husband, wife, teaching professionals. I think people are going to look at that and say, oh, I didn't know that was possible. And, there's plenty of space in Connecticut for that to happen. And I think, enough density and popularity of the sport in general. So I think that is going to happen in Connecticut. The NSL team, I think, just is bringing more awareness and more excitement, locally. And then as that type of competition can get into more public spaces, that's going to be helpful, as opposed to, for example, hosting that at a private club or something like that. So I think that will be positive. There's a community center opening in Bridgeport this fall. So I mentioned the squash and education model. So it's in an underserved community right next to a middle school, I believe, and will actually be kind of a headquarter location for the National Squash and Education organization. So those types of projects, I think, are also just, again, important parts of the ecosystem generally.
That $1 billion facility down there for MLS, maybe there's space.
I mean, my mind went to like just the concentration of universities as well. Like if it is, a program, or becomes a program that can garner some NIL, dollars, and can that also then be a tipping point to get some high school, it's if it becomes a feeder, right? And if students are have scholarship opportunities, or they become, more sort of desirable prospective students because they are associated with the game.
I want to see
that could be another way to get young, early education more involved.
That young, brash squash player just emerges.
Yeah. Absolutely. It is sort of an ecosystem, and where those breakthrough opportunities occur, it's a little hard to say. Having a solid college squash association is super helpful. They just hired a director of expansion, I think the title is called. So making sure current programs are supported well, but also sort of with an eye towards, hey, where are there conversion opportunities here? And a pipeline. I know Connecticut has a strong state college infrastructure. So whether that be, and we also have our eye on the Cal schools, of course, as well, particularly as we're investing more in Southern California, et cetera. So if we can get a foothold there, that will be helpful too. There's another squash and education program in Berkeley, or in Oakland, right near Berkeley. So there definitely things are bubbling up in different locations.
How's the program at your alma mater? There's some cold
steady. Very cold but steady. They've got one of the best coaches in the world, probably if not the best, David Palmer, and they're sort of consistent top 10 programs, and ones with scholar athletes to the core. Right. Yeah. These are great students, great athletes. And the program now has 2 national champions. Obviously, Cornell just won the men's lacrosse championship. But 2 years ago, there was a men's national champion, and the year before that, a women's national champion. So it's got a great history. And in the end, getting sort of that national championship as a team kind of comes down to recruiting and slots. But it's a great program.
What's something that you would leave, as a piece of advice for someone who is, leading a nonprofit, rallying a culture and a movement, and you mentioned keeping the vision top of mind, but is there something that you rely on, or a habit that you kind of default to kind of keep that will, and sort of and keep that drive, or is it some other element that kind of just gives you that refreshed zest? How would you tell someone to approach it to keep that alive?
For me, I think just simply keeping perspective on things, on the work. One, to the extent possible, always reminding people of the connection to sort of the mission and work. And you're going to attract people who really believe in that and want to move that forward. So that's helpful. But then also in working with people, just understanding that everybody always has something going on in their life that's really challenging that you have no idea about, right? And so, on the one hand, you want to hold people to a high standard and have high expectations of excellence at the end of the day, to help achieve the mission and whatever their role is in that. And at the same time, it's like, look, you know, life happens and it's hard, and balancing that expectation with empathy, I think, while so just keeps people self-motivated in that way, and sort of, you know, helps me stay motivated. So, and at the end of the day, you're only as good as the people that are around you. And so, really sort of empowering them, and that empathy also goes towards, you know, making mistakes. You know, if you empower people, they're definitely going to make mistakes and make decisions that you don't agree with, that either worked out or didn't, and sort of tolerating that, while not encouraging sort of irresponsible decision making. Those are some of the things that occur to me, I guess.
That's great. You know, as you were kind of going through that, I was thinking back to how you mentioned as a leader, you're very sort of structured and process oriented, and it feels like that's, you know, you had mentioned some people rally around the boastful leader, and others really value the stability and the consistency of someone that is a bit more, you know, smooth and process oriented. And it feels like that's really served you in your journey so far.
I think it has. I think a close mentor of mine and a former board member said, look, you know, you're putting in the work. It'll be nice to see when the results pull through. And I think that's beginning to happen now. I think it's easier to be sort of a flashy, charismatic leader, but it doesn't necessarily translate into achieving great things.
Agreed. Well, we're all eager for the storyline, so to speak, to get to 28 and to see what plays out, and hopefully, you know, we'll be chatting and keeping in touch, and you can fill us in on some of the updates that are happening from inside the court walls.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I would be surprised and disappointed if you didn't, you know, catch the storyline just organically, because we're out there in the media space. So I think that's going to happen more and more. So but I appreciate it. Appreciate being on the show.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Have a great day.